The sound wasn't a crash. It was a scream. The scream of fiberglass being ripped apart by something older and harder than itself. At 11:30 p.m., Julian was asleep in the warm, dry belly of his sailboat, the Kestrel. By 11:31 p.m., he was chest deep in the Atlantic Ocean. There was no warning, no storm, no rogue wave. Just a sudden, violent impact that sounded like a cannon shot in the dark. A whale, unseen and massive, had struck the hull. The water didn't trickle in, it roared. It surged through the floorboards with the force of a fire hose, carrying books, charts, and food containers in a swirling vortex of debris. In the pitch black, Julian wasn't a sailor anymore. He was a frantic animal fighting for air. He scrambled naked toward the companionway, the water already at his neck. He had seconds, not minutes, seconds to decide what to grab, what to leave, and whether he was going to live or die tonight. He grabbed a knife. He grabbed the ditch bag. And he threw himself into the black void of the ocean just as the Kestrel groaned one last time and began its slide into the abyss. 5 minutes. That is all it took. 5 minutes to erase 10 years of hard work, his home, and his safety. Julian sat in a 6-foot circular rubber life raft, shivering uncontrollably, watching the mast light of his boat, the only star he knew in this universe, sink beneath the waves. Then the light blinked out, and the silence rushed in. He was 800 miles from land. He had 3 liters of water, and he was alone. Most people think survival is about fighting nature. It isn't. In the first 3 days, Julian realized survival is about fighting your own mind. The ocean doesn't care if you live. It doesn't hate you. It just exists, vast and indifferent. The first 72 hours were a blur of seasickness and shock. The raft, an orange pimple on the face of the Atlantic, tossed violently in the swells. Every wave felt like a car crash. His body was bruised, his skin raw from the salt, but his mind was paralyzed by the math of his death. He did the calculations on the second morning. Humans can survive 3 weeks without food, but only 3 days without water. He had enough water for 2 days if he rationed it to sips. After that, his kidneys would shut down, his blood would thicken, and his brain would hallucinate rivers that weren't there until his heart simply stopped beating. He needed a miracle, or he needed to become an engineer of his own survival. He had a solar still, a primitive inflatable device designed to turn salt water into fresh water through evaporation. It was his only hope. On day 4, with his throat feeling like it was lined with sandpaper, he deployed it. He watched the condensation beads form on the plastic canopy like diamonds. 1 drop, 2 drops. It took hours to produce a mouthful. When he finally drank it, it tasted like warm rubber and plastic. But to Julian, it was the sweetest vintage wine he had ever tasted. But the ocean has a way of giving hope just before it takes it away. By the second week, the hunger set in. Real hunger. Not the appetite you feel when you skip lunch, but a primal, gnawing emptiness that feels like your body is eating itself from the inside out. Because it is. Julian looked at his legs and saw the muscle wasting away. He was becoming a skeleton in a rubber tomb. He realized then that he was no longer a man. He was part of the food chain. And currently, he was at the bottom. To survive, he had to climb to the top. He had a spear gun in his ditch bag, a relic he had thrown in at the last second. He looked over the edge of the raft. The ocean creates its own ecosystem around floating objects. Barnacles had started to grow on the bottom of his raft. Small triggerfish had come to eat the barnacles. And where there are small fish, the monsters follow. They were dorados, mahi-mahi, beautiful, shimmering fish of gold and green, 3 feet long, pure muscle. They circled his raft like wolves. They weren't just curious, they were waiting for him to die. Julian knew he couldn't overpower them. He was weak, dehydrated, and standing on a wobbling floor. He had to be smarter. He spent hours learning their patterns. He watched how they darted, how they turned. He became a hunter. On day 18, he took the shot. The spear flew through the water and struck a dorado in the flank. The water exploded. The fish thrashed with incredible power, dragging the line, threatening to puncture the thin rubber of the raft. If the spear tip hit the raft, Julian would sink. It was a wrestling match between a starving man and a creature of pure muscle. Julian hauled the line in, hand over hand, ignoring the cuts on his palms. He dragged the fish onto the raft, pinning it down with his knees until its thrashing stopped. He didn't cook it. He couldn't. He cut the meat raw, the blood staining the orange floor of the raft. He ate it like an animal, tears streaming down his face, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming rush of life entering his body. The protein hit his system like a drug. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was winning. But the ocean notices when you start to win. It sends a challenger. It started with a bump, a heavy, solid thud against the bottom of the raft that knocked Julian off balance. He froze. He knew that feeling. It wasn't a wave. It was something alive. He peered over the edge and saw a shadow, a shape darker than the deep blue, moving with a terrifying, silent grace. A shark. And not just any shark, a blue whaler. 10 feet of sandpaper skin and serrated teeth. It was circling the raft, sensing the blood from the Dorado. The shark bumped the raft again, harder this time. It was testing the durability of the shell. It was tasting the rubber. Julian grabbed his paddle, his only weapon, when the shark came close, snapping at the air bladders that kept him afloat. Julian struck. He slammed the paddle onto the shark's nose. The shark thrashed, splashing water into the raft, and dived. For the next 6 hours, it was a siege. The shark would circle, disappear, and then launch an attack from below. Julian couldn't sleep. He couldn't rest. He sat in the center of the raft, paddle in hand, screaming at the creature, asserting his dominance in a world where he had none. He realized that if he showed fear, he was prey. He had to be the apex predator, even if it was a lie. Finally, the shark lost interest. It slipped away into the gloom, leaving Julian shaking, exhausted, and terrifyingly aware of how thin the line was between the living and the dead. Day 40 marked a breaking point, not of his body, but of his mind. Isolation does strange things to the human brain. The silence becomes loud. The horizon, a perfect 360-degree line of nothingness, begins to warp. Julian started to hold meetings. He wasn't alone in the raft anymore, at least, not in his head. He created a crew. There was the captain, who was stern and commanded him to check the solar still. There was the cook, who obsessed over the Dorado meat. And there was the child, who just wanted to curl up and cry. He would spend hours debating with these voices aloud. They argued about navigation, about the weather, about whether they should use the last flare on a plane that was clearly just a cloud. It was madness, but it was a functional madness. It kept his mind active. It gave him social interaction in a vacuum. But the physical world was deteriorating. The salt water was eating him alive. He was covered in salt water boils, open sores that refused to heal because they were constantly soaked in brine. Every movement was agony. His skin was sloughing off in sheets. He was rotting while he was still alive. And then the solar still broke. The mechanism that separated the salt from the fresh water clogged. The production dropped to zero. Julian spent 2 days frantically trying to repair it with clumsy, swollen fingers. The thirst returned with a vengeance, harder than before because now he knew what he was missing. He looked at the ocean, billions of gallons of water, all of it poison. The temptation to drink the seawater was a siren song. Just one sip, his mind whispered. It will wet your throat. It will stop the burning. He knew that one sip would be the end. He fought the urge by chewing on the eyes of the fish he caught, sucking the fluid from their spinal columns. It was gruesome. It was primal, but it was liquid. On day 50, a ship appeared. It was a massive freighter, a floating city of steel moving across the horizon. Julian scrambled for his flare gun. His hand shook so badly, he almost dropped the cartridge. He fired. The red star shot into the sky, burning bright and hot against the gray clouds. He waved his orange shirt. He screamed until his vocal cords tore. The ship kept moving. It didn't turn. It didn't slow down. The bridge crew was likely on autopilot, or looking at radar screens, not at the ocean. Julian watched it fade into the distance, taking his hope with it. That night was the darkest. The realization that he was invisible was heavier than the hunger. He curled up in the bottom of the wet raft, the water sloshing around his sores, and he gave up. He closed his eyes and decided he wouldn't open them again. He was done fighting. But as the sun rose on day 51, something happened. A bird landed on the edge of the raft. A small, ragged shearwater. It looked at Julian with black, beady eyes. It didn't fly away. It was tired, just like him. Julian looked at the bird and felt a surge of rage. Not at the bird, but at the idea of dying. I refused to die yesterday, he thought. Why should I consent to die today? He sat up. He checked the solar still. He fixed the clog. He caught another fish. He kept going. He realized that hope is not a feeling. It is a discipline. You don't wait for hope to arrive. You manufacture it, day by day, breath by breath. By day 70, the raft was disintegrating. The rubber was porous. The glue holding the seams was melting in the tropical sun. He was pumping air into the tubes every hour just to stay afloat. He was tied to a sinking corpse. The currents were dragging him west, toward the Caribbean, but he had no way of knowing if he would hit an island or drift through the gaps into the vast, empty Pacific. If he missed the islands, he was a dead man. On the morning of day 76, the color of the water changed. For 2 months, the water had been a deep, abyssal blue, the color of the deep ocean. But this morning, it was turquoise, green, the color of shallow water, the color of land. Julian pulled himself up to the edge of the raft. His legs were atrophied, useless sticks. He pulled himself up with his arms, straining his neck. There on the horizon was a jagged line. Not a cloud, not a wave, a mountain. He was drifting toward the island of Marie Galante, near Guadeloupe. But the ocean had one final test. The current was pushing him toward the sharp coral reefs that guarded the island like a fortress. If the raft hit the coral, it would shred instantly, and Julian, too weak to swim, would drown within sight of salvation. He paddled. He paddled with arms that were nothing but bone and sinew. He paddled with the desperation of a man who had cheated death for 2.5 months and wasn't going to let it take him now. He fought the current, inch by inch, steering the raft toward a small gap in the reef. He heard the roar of the surf. He saw the white water crashing over the sharp rocks. He closed his eyes and braced for impact. The raft surged forward, lifted by a massive swell. It passed over the sharpest rocks, skimming the surface by inches, and crashed into the calm lagoon on the other side. Silence again. But this time, it wasn't the silence of the void. It was the silence of peace. He heard the sound of crickets, the smell of wet earth. Julian rolled out of the raft and fell into the water. It was warm and shallow. He crawled, literally crawled on his hands and knees, up the white sand beach. He couldn't stand. He collapsed on the dry sand, grabbing fistfuls of it, letting the grains run through his fingers just to feel something solid. He lay there for an hour, just breathing. He was a skeleton wrapped in sun-damaged skin, covered in sores, bearded and wild. Then he heard a sound he hadn't heard in 76 days. Footsteps. 2 local fishermen had seen the strange orange object drift in. They walked cautiously toward the figure on the beach. They saw a man who looked like he had returned from the grave. Julian looked up at them. His throat was so dry he couldn't speak. He just pointed to his mouth. Water. They ran to get help. When they carried him to the hospital later that day, the doctors were silent. They looked at his charts. They looked at his body mass index. They looked at the salt sores. By all medical science, the man on the bed should be dead. His survival wasn't just unlikely. It was a biological impossibility. But Julian Thorne didn't survive because of biology. He didn't survive because he was strong or because he was a hero. He survived because he made a choice. Every single morning, when the sun rose over that endless, terrifying horizon, he made the choice to suffer for one more day. He spent 76 days drifting in a rubber coffin, hunting with a spear, drinking water from the sun, and battling the monsters of the deep. He lost his boat. He lost 40 pounds of flesh. He lost his mind and found it again. But as he lay in that hospital bed, drinking a glass of cold, clear water, he realized what he had found. He looked out the window at the ocean, the vast blue killer that had held him hostage. He didn't feel fear. He felt respect, and he felt the profound, unshakable weight of simply being alive. In the end, the ocean didn't let him go. He fought his way out, and he left the sea with the only thing that mattered, his life.